Well, Shabbat Shalom. Welcome back to Branches of Yah. We're going to work towards finishing Lessons from a Sheepdog by Philip Keller. And today we'll start on chapter 4, and we will go as far as we can without making it too long. And I welcome you and ask you to please like, subscribe, and share. Mostly share. Share the words of hope and the words of light, the Bashar, the message that we were cut off and now we're not, through the Messiah, through the Hamashiach. Let's share that message everywhere we go. If you find a person of shalom, go in and sup with them. If they're not, dust off your feet and move on. Pray that Yah sends another. So let's get into our wonderful book of Lessons from a Sheepdog today. And hallelujah, praise the Most High for all he does all the time. Hallelujah. Again, we're going to be going to chapter 4. So if you have the book, you can follow along. The book is, of course, has words in it I won't be using, but you can still follow the general theme of it. All right, we will be starting in lesson 4. It is the delight of obedience. Hallelujah. The summer season, giving way to the lovely autumn days, Lass and I were caught up in the great adventures together. Handling the sheep, running the ranch, guarding against predators were more than mere work. Rather, our life on the land was a joyous pleasure. It was from Lass that I learned a profound lesson of what it really means to please the Master, to please the Most High, to enrich the Ruach. Lass was not a noisy dog. She seemed seldom barked, except the warmth of a stranger's approach. She, when we worked together, was almost totally silent. Her energies were given to carrying out my commands. This was not always easy, for she was no longer a young pup. A mature dog, already somewhat set in her ways, she had to learn to obey. The lessons taught her were intense and uncomplicated. The words of commands were short and to the point. Come, sit, fetch, stay, stop, down, right, left, and so on. They were spoken clearly, explicitly, without waste of syllables. By degrees, she learned the meaning of each. Steadily, she began to respond to every correct move and was rewarded with lavish praise and a hearty approval. Strangers began to hear about this remarkable dog and would drive out from the city and watch her work with me. They would stand pensively at the gate, asking permission to see how beautifully she obeyed my commands. The most common comments they made were, "She just loves to work with you. She enjoys carrying out your wishes. She finds pleasure in pleasing you by her obedience." In our happy hours of fair winds, as we went about our tasks together, ample time to reflect on this great lesson learned from Lass. It became obvious to me that as my will and wishes were devoted dog were expressed in clear, concise terms, so likewise our Heavenly Father's will for us has been stated in simple, straightforward language in His Word. Yah has not left us without clear instructions. His desires for us have been articulated in unmistakable terms. His Word is sharp, precise, and to the point, and it is our humble responsibility to learn to respond to it. This is among the Messiah's followers, the element of confusion which people claim not to understand clearly what his intentions are. There really is no excuse for this. Any person who desires to know the Most High and do the will of him will find it stated clearly in his word. The basic difficulty is not a lack of comprehension on our part. The question is simply the intransient of our own unyielding wills. Most of us will simply not submit to the control of the Messiah. The greatest illusion any man or woman could ever come under is the idea that it is a drag to do the will of Elohim. Just the opposite is true. Yet our old natures and selfish interests endeavor to deceive us into believing that it is a bore and bondage to serve our Master. Part of this is associated with the traditional idea of serving the Most High in fear. The use of this word fear through the Old Testament, the Tanakh, has most unfortunately left the wrong impression upon our minds. And it was Lass who brought me to a clear concept of its true meaning. To fear, with regard to the Most High, means reverence and utter awe, to hold in such loving esteem as to be afraid of grieving the one you so admire. This was the attitude Lass held towards me. It had been built on trust and had grown gradually in the realization she could count on the consistency of my conduct and the credibility of my character. She had come to see me as more than just her master, but also her friend. We were fellow workers and a great responsibility of running a ranch. Her loyalty was grounded in love. This is precisely what Yahusha referred to when he spoke so intimately to the 11 followers just before his death. You are my friends, and if you do whatever I command you. From this point forward, I call you not my servants, for a servant does not know what his master does. But I have called you friends. Yohanan 15:14-15. Ultimately, our love for the Most High Elohim is demonstrated not by sentimental emotion, but rather implicit obedience to his will expressed in our loving cooperation with his commands. When we comply with his wishes, our walk with him or our work with him, our way with him become a deep delight. Not only is he immensely pleased, but so also are we. It never ceased to amaze me and stimulate me to see how thrilled Lass was in her wholehearted obedience. Her eyes would sparkle with pleasure. Her tail would wag with joy, and her body was electric, vibrant with ecstatic satisfaction. This is what she had been designed to do, and precisely the same held true for me in my personal relationship with Yahusha. The question was, did I realize this? Most of us do not. I did not come into this interaction with Elohim until I was a man well into my 40s. It takes some of us old dogs much longer to learn new tricks than it ever took Lass to learn to love and obey me. I confess, here with burning shame through this dear dog was a living, vibrant example of what it means to be obedient. My strong will was slow to learn the same lesson. Lass had a lot to unlearn, but she was eager and anxious to obey. At heart, is what she wanted most was my approval. This is the point that escapes many of us. We seem rather indifferent to whether or not our conduct meets with our master's approval. Do we really care what he thinks of our character? Lass, like me, had not come to love Fairwinds, but came to regard it. She revealed in all her sights and smells and sounds of the natural world pushing us around. Each new dawn was the beginning of a bright new adventure. She was eager to learn any fresh lesson. Of these, by far most advanced and demanding were working to understand and learn the hand signals instead of the spoken words of command. By combining the two together, she gradually made the transition from one to another. For instance, if she was running toward me at high speed, I only had to raise my arm vertically with a hand fully extended, and she would drop to the ground at once. This was the signal for stop. It was essential that she master this means of communication. First, it was often at great distances from her, almost out of voice range, so it saved shouting and yelling. Secondly, it was much less disturbing to the sheep if we communicated in this cooperative silence. For this short command to work well between us, Lass had to learn to keep me in view and give me her constant, undivided attention. The parallel relationship in our walk and our work with our master is most important, for as we mature in our ruachal lives, we come to understand clearly the providential hand of Yahuwah guiding us. Early in our experiences with the Mashiach, it is imperative that we discover his will for us in and through the word spoken. In time, the word grows so familiar and so much of a force within our own wills that it becomes natural for us to comply with his commands. When we are then able to sense and detect his will being expressed to us by his providential handling of our lives, we begin to look for Elohim's hand in all the details and events of our days. We become acutely sensitive to his presence, and we find our minds and our ruachs and our emotions concentrated on Mashiach, eager to do his bidding. This does not happen overnight, nor does it simply take place in one short burst of devotion. As long months it took last to learn hand commands, so it takes us years in some cases to sense the unmistakable hand of Elohim directing us in every detail of our personal pilgrimage. I know no more exalted joy than the harmonious partnership as I understand it. That is what it means to be a friend of Elohim. The communion between the Mashiach and me is very intimate and complementary. There is no strain or tension between us, but rather a superb rapport. The end result of a remarkable collaboration between Lass and myself was an enormous benefit that came to both the sheep and the ranch because of her behavior. Through her prompt, explicit obedience, the sheep were moved easily. They were handled through her swift, smooth actions with a minimum of disturbance. Just as Lass had learned to love and respect and respond to me, so the sheep soon discovered that Lass meant them no harm, but was only carrying out the commands intended for their best interest. They learned that they could not outwit her, outrun her, or outflank her. Their contentment was to do what she wanted them to do, because that really was the master's wishes. The ranch flourished and prospered as Lass and I increasingly integrated into a smoothly functioning team. Everything turned on our cooperation and compatibility. The same holds true for us in our contacts, in other lives that Yahuwah entrusts us to touch. The men and the women that are ever going to understand that the will of Elohim has to be through our implicit obedience and devotion to him. If they are able to grasp the character of the Mashiach, it must be through our reflection of him as our friend. And as I saw last, this is how the Master truly intends his work to be done in this world. His work can be done with delight, and it can be done so that others will benefit beneath the guidance of his great and righteous hand. Lesson 5. The test of faithfulness. During our working years together, several problems areas began to appear in Lass's behavior. In a strange way, one of the greatest strengths became her greatest weakness. It was a matter of wanting me in view at all times. Lass had passionate fixation on being with me and in action beside me. This intense loyalty contributed enormously to her prompt obedience and enabled her to react to my hand signals so well. So it can be understood why when the command she found most difficult to carry out was stay. This implicit word meant for her to remain steady wherever she was placed. On a sheep ranch, part of the success of the sheep involves moving them continuously from pasture to pasture. It also means intensive management of the flock and sorting out ewes and lambs and rams. Only the eager assistance of a righteous shepherd can these operations be carried out efficiently and without undue disturbance for the sheep. At such times, it meant I might ask her to guard an open gate, or she might be expected to hold a small band of ewes in the corner while I checked their lambs. Or it might be that any one of a dozen other little tasks that demanded her to be steadfast, alert, and on guard while I was busy about their other duties. Lass often felt that she was missing out on the action in these situations. If I disappeared out of her view, she was sure she had been forgotten. She would become uneasy and beginning to move about, take off in search of me. When I came back to find her, she was gone. It was always a severe disappointment. The sheep would quickly scatter out work, and all that we had done would be undone, and the task would have to be started all over again. Lass, of course, could not fully comprehend the complexity of the work we were doing, and at times she gave me the distinct impression for, as a dog as energetic as she was, to stay was almost asking too much of her. Elohim used this element in Lass to teach me the most important principle. I began to grasp the absolute necessity to be quietly steadfast and faithful wherever he places me, in a sense that interludes in life where a test not only of my faithfulness to Elohim, but also of his to me. Such times of apparent interaction are not necessarily a trial for the lethargic or the easygoing individual, but for the person eager to be in the thick of things, who is keen for evidence of the master at work. These are tough and testing times. We may feel we are forgotten by Yahuwah. In retrospect, I realize that even during those times at Fairwind, I sometimes felt that way towards the Messiah. I often wondered why I should be stuck with this flock of sheep. I wondered why Yahuwah did not allow me to get into greater action in other areas of my life. It was hard to see that I was learning to be steadfast just where he had placed me. And at such times, we do not have a greater view of what it is to be an upright shepherd. We do not see his hand at work. We are sorely tempted to break faith, to make the next move all on our own. It has been said that almost any of us can be heroic, even daring in the midst of great excitement. But it takes a much more steadfast faith in our Father to stay true to a quiet place where he puts us, in the daily duties of our little lives, where Elohim asks us to be loyal, steady friends, people who will perform their part without fanfare, those who can be entrusted implicitly to do their duty. In reflecting on those days with Lass, I am still stirred by memories of a time when she proved so true to me. I can recall vividly how thrilled I was to find that she had stuck to her post and played her part well, how I would pat and praise her, and how she reveled in my adulation. It is exactly the same for us. Hamashiach will again make his presence apparent to us. He need not be grieved or disappointed. He can only be given the great joy of finding us faithful in the place where he puts us. His measurement of our success does not lie in our spectacular activity. It lies in our quiet steadfastness for him. He does not expect us to fully understand his management of our lives, but he does ask us to stay true to him today. It was at this point in her performance that Lass was exposed to the most severe temptations. Of these, by far, were more tormenting than a flock of crows that nested on a nearby island. The noisy black rascals had chosen to establish a regular rookery in the trees and hung out in the rock outcrops offshore. There is a tangle of tough branches. They built their nests, laid their eggs, and reared their fledglings. In the usual manner of these crafty birds, they were alert to any danger. They regarded Lass and me as intruders in their territory, seemed to find some fiendish pleasure in tormenting us with their raucous cries and daring dives. For the dog, they became a formidable temptation and distraction from our duties. The noisy birds would come streaming out of their trees and swoop low over Lass with jeering caws and tormenting tactics. They would skim down just above her head like dive bombers swooping to attack. The distraction was so strong that Lass would tear away after them, leaping, barking, racing over the fields with wild abandon. Her muscled frame seemed almost to float above the fields as she swept over after the crows in full flight. At times, I had a clear impression that the crows engaged in this game with devilish glee. And when it was all over, Lass would come back, spent and exhausted, her tongue hanging out of her weariness. In one sense, it all seemed very amusing. In fact, that she would look up into my face, her head crooked to one side, as if to say, "What great sport that was." I really put them to flight. Actually, in another dimension, it was a serious obstacle to the efficient operations of the ranch. For what the crows did was to distract the dog from her paramount duties. Their silly games wore her out and exhausted her energies for useful service, because the most disagreeable part was the mischievous birds caused Lass to break faith and tear off after them, and when she was supposed to stay. I often thought the crows and how they managed to intrude themselves into my management of the ranch. They flew in from outside the property. They were in no way a part of it. Yet their appearances every spring, when they returned from their winter migration to the south, were a signal that we had to put up with their nuisance behavior all summer. In the contest with the belligerent birds, I saw clearly a parallel that we face in our service for Elohim. We are often distracted from the Master's highest intentions for us by attenuating events in our lives. Circumstances which are not part of his purpose for us intrude themselves into our experience. At first appearance, they may seem harmless, even somewhat entertaining. The difficulty is that distract us from most important responsibilities to the Messiah. They call us away and tempt us to take off in hot pursuit. In the process of our energies are wasted, our strength is expelled, yet they benefit neither Yahuwah or his flock. And it may appear as a very spectacular show. It might even seem to us a legitimate part of our service. Still, it really is not anything more than a show and a distraction. Without being unduly critical, it is essential for each one of us to examine our lives and ascertain what diverts us from the highest duties to which Elohim calls to us. His co-workers within the community of our congregation. It often, the temptation to entertain rather than to edify Yahuwah's peoples is the desire to amuse audiences rather than to instruct them in Elohim's word. The temptations come in many guises, but like the crows, they that are shiny in their bright plumage, they were black rascals bent on mischief. It seemed fascinating irony at Fairwinds in this autumn, about the time the crows flocked up for their fall migration. We began our land clearing operations. With the summer work over and the arrival of the gentle autumn rains, it was time to start tearing out the underbrush and unwanted trees to provide new pastures for the flock. Instead of the crows to chase, Lass now turned her attention to the blazing sparks that would be carried out from the wind on the roaring fires, and the glowing cinders from drifted across the skies. She would go racing and leaping after them, barking furiously, often in the midst of my work. I would stop and watch the remarkable performance she put on. She would leap into midair, snapping excitedly at the burning fragments borne aloft on the rising heat waves. Occasionally, sparks would settle onto her shiny coat, where she would begin to smolder, then char her hair. It gave off a repulsive stench and drifted into the cool winter winds. In further excitement, Lass would roll in the damp grass and snap furiously at the offending sparks that set her afire. It was all very spectacular, but in reality it did not help the work on the ranch. It wore her out completely. And during those times of testing, when she was expected to stay steadfast, it often took a simple spark to undo all of our work. Of course, these episodes in which Lass let me down came as keen disappointment. She sensed that she had not been faithful. Our own land-clearing fires had been her undoing. The same principle holds true within the body, within any community of believers, but perhaps most importantly within our own private relationship to Mashiach himself. There is a tendency to be taken up that which is highly emotional. People are always fascinated by excitement and ecstasy in any form. The long historical record of Yahuwah's dealings with his people is shot through for instances where false fire and strange sacrifices led to the disaster and disillusionment, often had its origins within the body itself. That which was intended by Elohim to serve his own greater purposes for the righteousness and honor becomes a diversion that nullifies our usefulness to him. It is worthy of consideration today in society, and many of the flamboyant believers often lack any credibility in their flaming zeal, inordinate preoccupation with the dramatic displays. There's often intermingled irresponsibilities, sensuality that leads them astray. There's a tendency in the body to be carried out in the peripheral issues to take Elohim's servants off on tangents. Too often the emphasis is on the dramatic rather than on the will of Elohim. In working with Lass, this lesson came to me again and again. It is not spectacular nor the sensational for which the Master looks. He seeks instead for me to simply be faithful wherever he places me in his all-wise plans and purposes. Lesson 6, Love and Discipline. It'll be obvious by now the mutual affection established between Lass and myself was very precious to both of us. It seemed to me at times that our intimate relationship was much more than merely a man and a dog, more than a shepherd and his sheepdog, more even than the efficient co-workers. We had become special friends. With her keen perception, sensitive instincts, and acute intelligence, Lass had the capacity not only to understand my commands, but even to anticipate my wishes. It was this unusual awareness that made her such a remarkable worker. Because of this harmonious cooperation between us, the livestock operation prospered and flourished. The sheep were handled efficiently with a minimal of disturbance. My own work was made much easier and more joyous. Lass herself was totally fulfilled and companion who received in all of her responsibilities. I sometimes thought of all our relationships as a triad of triumph between master and friend and flock. All of it possible because of the loving cooperation of a border collie. Reflecting on this happy association we enjoyed at Fairwinds, I often thought of this to be precisely the relationship Messiah desires with us. More than anything, he wants me to be his companion, his co-worker, his friend in helping to tend his flock. This is really the essence of that final discourse he shared with his 11 disciples before his deah. It is recorded for us in great detail by Yohanan in his recount in chapters 14 through 17. Any person who wishes to grasp the true meaning of our love for Elohim should read and meditate on these superb insights. Love for the Master is not sentimental emotion that sweeps over the nefesh in moments of special piety. Love for the Messiah is a deliberate setting of the will to carry out the commands at any cost. It is his delight for accomplishing our Father's highest purposes, no matter how challenging. The end result of such conduct is to bring sweet satisfaction to the upright shepherd. Because of such single-minded service, we sense his approval of our behavior, for we know of surety that we are loved and appreciated. And the ultimate end of the other benefit, others are baruched, others are cared for. Yahushua himself put it this way: "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. For greater love has no man than this, that he would lay down his life for his brethren. You are my friends if you do whatever I command you." It should be pointed out emphatically, to lay down one's life for another means to put the interests and wishes of another ahead of your own. It implies that to obey the Messiah and carry out his intentions is more desirable than doing any of my own will. It is one thing to put down with pen and paper, but it is the toughest lesson for any of us that we can learn to live it out in our daily lives and duties. It simply is not natural for most of us to love Elohim or love others in dramatic discipline of a laid down life. We are selfish and self-serving people. We have the strange worldly idea that to be of lowly service is to be used or abused. And Elohim, through his Messiah, came among us in lowly service. He came to minister to us, to give himself to us. So because he first loved us, we in turn are to be willing and ready to love him and others. As the years went by at Fairwinds, I saw in ever-increasing clarity what Yahushua meant when he spoke of his love for us and our love for him. I began to understand the true implications and demands of a laid-down life. Continuously, I was giving myself to Lass. I gave her my strength, my attention, my affection, loyalty, and friendship. I gave her my very life. She, in turn, reciprocated an outpouring by giving back to me her vitality, her vigor, her enthusiasm, her cooperation, her love, her loyalty. Together, all the benefits of the relationships then were poured out upon the flock. Our mutual energies and expertise were spent in caring for the sheep. This would be how the son esteems his father. It would be wonderful if this sheepdog story could end here on this noble note, but it cannot, for to be true to the tale, there were some disappointing interludes. There were times in which Lass did break faith. There were days when she did not stay steadfast. There were many distractions that came along and drew her away from her line of duty. Love, so betrayed, demands discipline to be restored. There were grievous interludes for her, for me, and for the flock. To correct her and to mend the breach between us, there had to be discipline. This was not easy or pleasant, but it was absolutely essential. I loved Lass far too much to let her revert back to her old wretched lifestyle. I was too fond of her to allow her to waste her energies for nothing. She was made for great things, intended for lofty service from both of us, and she would have to suffer to set her straight. Discipline is never pleasant. The correction that comes with love causes pain for both the administrator and the recipient. Most of us prefer to push it all aside. We find it easier to simply brush bad behavior to one side, acting as if it did not matter. But the true love demands discipline. If there is to be mutual trust, integrity, and loyalty again, then it must involve some suffering for us to learn this lesson. It was not easy to punish Lass. After all, she was my friend. It demanded self-discipline on my part to insist that she perform properly and up to her full potential. To correct her conduct with stern words, a severe reprimand, or even a sharp slap made her draw back with reproach. Her bright eyes would fill with foreboding, and she would lay back her ears with remorse. She would crouch low and her tail drawn down between her legs in a hangdog posture. In a few moments, there was a distinct coolness between us. She knew full well that she had failed, and she knew that I was far from satisfied with her performance. I never allowed these interludes of discipline to last long. Correction came swiftly. It came surely, yet it was over in a short order. Then I would call to her to come to me quietly. I would speak to her in soft, reassuring tones. Lass, it's all over. I would hold her close and rub her chest, rub my hands over her head. We're friends. All is well. Her eyes would begin to sparkle again as she looked into my face. Sometimes she would reach out to lick my cheek with her tongue. Her body would quiver and she would begin to move her tail with pleasure. The strict discipline had brought total restoration of trust between us. We were fond and loyal friends again. Her highest and upright had been served. The best interests of all of us had been preserved. For me, the entire area of Elohim's discipline of my personal life was the best learned from Lass. Through such examples, I came to understand implicitly what my master's intentions are for me during those times when he corrects my conduct. And the Ruach of Elohim makes abundantly clear in Abru 12:6-11, for whom Yahuwah loves, he chastens. Now, no chastening for the present seems to be joyous, but grievous nevertheless. Afterward it yields a peaceful fruit of righteousness unto them that are exercised thereby. For years there have been prominent in the body an unbalanced overemphasis upon the love of Elohim. There has been an universal tendency to teach that the Mashiach is so compassionate and so kind that he does not discipline us for wrongdoing. There's a false impression that any old thing can go on, that Yahuwah will simply forgive and forget all about it. It simply is not so. There's a price to pay for our perverseness. There is a discipline we deserve for wrongdoing. There is the Master's demand that we be faithful in service, that we serious in our responsibilities to him and others. We distort the truth of character of the Messiah if we assert that he will merely wink at wrong. He is grieved when we deliberately disobey the commands and selfishly ignore his Father's wishes. When Kepha betrayed his master the night before the impalement, it took one searching look to shatter the man's soul. He went out in the darkness and broke down in tears and remorse. In bursting shame, he was reduced from a tough, cursing fellow to a soul-shattered penitent. Yet, this was the man so swiftly restored after the Master's resurrection. He was the servant spoken to with such reassurance beside the lake. Kepha, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. 3 times over in a triad of tenderness, the bonds of trust, love, and loyalty were reestablished between Yahusha and his friend. And like Lass, we shrink back from the discipline of Elohim. We find it grievous. We would rather it would be set aside. It cannot be. It is for our best and is for his benefit and is essential for the eventual Baruch of others and whose lives we touch. And when it is all over, the bonds of affection between the Mashiach and ourselves, and even stronger than before, for instinctively deep within our own Ruach, we know we deserve discipline. We know the Master would not be true to himself or to his Father or to us if he simply let our misconduct slide into sinister selfishness. His disciples, because he cares, because he loves, because he heals, with reassurance comes renewed joy. There's a total restoration. There's a sheer delight in once again doing his bidding. Lesson 7, available for anything. Perhaps the most unforgettable lesson I learned from Lass can be best summed up in 3 words: available for anything. The realization that though she was only a dog, she exhibited a remarkable trait in all of our years together was tremendously challenging. In this story, I've tried to convey some of the love and loyalty and excitement we shared as a master and friend, yet all these varied experiences, it was ultimately Lass who taught me best what it really means to be utterly abandoned to the Master's purposes. She showed me in her loving devotion what it cost to be always available for anything that needed to be done in the interests of the ranch and flock. The principle is best understood by recounting 2 entirely different types of duties she was expected to carry out. The first had to do with gathering up or counting sheep. Because of the very character of the sheep, their helplessness and susceptibility to disease and vulnerability to predators, they must be under the owner's constant scrutiny. By far, the surest way to make certain all is well for the sheepman is to take count every day. In this way, he knows at once if the sheep is free from harm. I can recall a sense of foreboding would sweep over me whenever I went into the pasture and I would find one or several of the ewes or lambs was missing. I can still sense the despair that flooded over me when I came out in the morning and discovered that either a cougar or stray dogs had wrought havoc among the flock during the night. Dead sheep or torn lambs would lie strewn in the field, and only an accurate count would determine its devastating losses. On other occasions, when the flocks were fat and flourishing and fallen acorns, it was quite common for the choicest ewes to become cast, unable to get back on their feet. They would soon die unless I found them in time and turned them over. It was always an ominous sign when the dark-winged buzzards wheeled in the sky above our terrain. Immediately I knew they were watching for a hapless sheep that might soon provide them with a gory banquet at its carcass. I would call Lass. "Well, girl, we have to gather up the sheep today." She would race to my side, eager to go anywhere, any time. Some of our land lay in beautiful open fields, where occasional clumps of trees scattered over it like a lovely English park. Other parts were wild and rough, especially along the shoreline. Some of this was rocky with great granite outcroppings. Amid the boulders there were patches of wild roses, thorny blackberry tangles, old stumps, and down timber. The sheep loved to work their way back to these spots, searching for stray patches of sweet grass or other dainty herbs that they relished. It was no easy thing to find all the flocks in such difficult cut-over country, but this was an important part of the work entrusted to Lass. I would send her to fetch out every straggling stray ewe and lamb. "Fetch 'em, Lass," I command her. "Go and bring them home." Without hesitation, in an instant she'd be gone, pushing through the undergrowth, running over the rocks. It was stimulating to watch her work with such enthusiasm. She flung herself into the task until every sheep was brought out. There was a cost to the dog in all of this. She'd become very weary. Her face would be scratched and torn by the thickets. Her coat would be clogged in burrs and debris, and some of the pads of her feet would be lacerated with sharp stones. Yet she went openly and happy abandon. She knew that what I was doing was important, and all she desired to be a dynamic part of the whole project. Not once did she hesitate to hurl herself into the toughest tangle to gather up the flock. Her selfless abandon to my wishes made enormous impact upon me. In quiet moments of reverie, I would ask myself the nefesh-searching questions. Am I this available to my master? Am I willing to fling myself into his work? Am I so devoted to him? Does the matter of suffering deter me from my duty? More often than not, Lass put me to shame. Reflecting upon all of this, I began to see why it is that the Messiah calls us as his co-workers to go into tough places. Being his friend is no cozy guarantee that life will either be easy or agreeable. There are simply bound to be tough assignments, some suffering if we are to fully comply with his commands. I never sent Lass into hard places to her. I never put her in challenging circumstances to save the sheep. And it was out of all these endeavors together that she gradually matured and developed into this magnificent worker. All of us, as Yahuwah's people, seem to shrink back from suffering. We are so often reluctant to undertake even the smallest assignment for the Master. We are reluctant to share our strength and time, our talents, to touch others in trouble. We draw back from the distasteful situation where we might have to suffer a bit in order that others might be delivered. I saw all of this vividly as I worked with Lass, her shining ruach and her eager abandon to my wishes, combined with her form, a highly polished mirror in which clearly I saw reflected all the flaws of my own character, the failings of my own conduct toward the Messiah. It was wonderful, upright, and Kodesh Ruach used the same hearty service of that beautiful calling to break some of my own tough resistance to his will for me. If she could be so instantly available for anything, surely I could do as well for Elohim. Many of us fail to realize what noble honor it is to be called a friend of Elohim. We are not often shown that stirring challenge is to be called to suffer with him. We do not seem to see that amid the varied vicissitudes of life, he really does know what he is doing with us. He can grasp the whole scheme of things and see far beyond our finite view. He is utterly in command and control of every situation. Then let us trust him fully. Let us follow him fearlessly. Let us fling ourselves with wonderful abandon into his enterprises. This Lass did with me. Even in the darkest night and the most dangerous engagements, this is the second way in which she proved her loyalty. As the years went by, fair winds, our happy times were intercepted with challenging events that demanded extra determination for us to survive. The most frequent were attacks from both cougars and stray dogs at night. We lived close to wild country where there would be forested hills and wilderness terrain. From time to time, the cunning panthers would come out of the dense forest and raid the flock. To warn us of predators' stealthy approach at night, I would put bells on the sheep. If the sheep were startled in the dark, they would leap to their feet and flee for their lives. The wild tingle of the bells awakened me from my sleep. I would leap out of bed, grab my flashlight, take the well-worn .303 rifle that stood by my door, and dash out into the fields. One never knew whether sheep were being molested by stray dogs, cougars, or rustlers. For where we lived, most of the ranchers kept sheep, and rustling had been quite common in our part of the country. Men in trucks would back up to a fence, cut the wires, and make a wide opening, then send their trained dogs into the pastures to round up a bunch of sheep, driving them right into the truck that they would be hauled away. As I left the house in the dark, Lass would instantly be at my side. No need to even call her. With experience, she had learned to listen for the alarm jangle of the sheep bells ringing with the flock fled. Joyously, she would leap beside me and be bound up in the dark, lick my hand as if to say, "Cheer up, boss, this is a great adventure." So off we would go side by side to see what the danger was. It always surprised me how quickly the sheep sensed that we had come to protect them. They would soon start to relax and graze quietly again, or even lie down peacefully in the pastures. Yet in all of this, there was real danger for both Lass and myself. Rustlers were not adverse to shooting the rancher's dog, nor marauding dogs slow to attack another strange dog in the dark. Even the presence of a panther on the prowl was enough to make us doubly alert to any danger. But Lass seemed to revel in this excitement. Not once did I ever see her cringe from our night foyers in the fear. Never did she decide she would rather remain in the cozy comfort of her kennel. Some nights she would and I would actually spend the entire night keeping watch in the fields. I would rest quietly in the grass, rifle over my knees. She would lie crouched on the guard beside me. Her head often rested on my lap, but her eyes never closed. Her ears were ever alert in the faintest strange sound. If anything aroused her deep growl or would rumble in her chest, I'd be ready with the rifle. These were the intimate interludes for both of us. We were in this thing together. It had been a tough way for me to meet the tough challenge, but we simply had to be on guard. Because of it, we were able to keep the sheep from danger and protect them from predators. The Mashiach used Lass to teach me still another truth about himself in the dark and the difficult episodes in life. He's always there. He's fully alert and aware of the dangers abroad. He spares himself no pains to protect us from those who would imperil our lives. It is well to remind ourselves often the utter faithfulness of Elohim. We are too prone to believe that he really is not with us, and that he does not know what dangers confront us, that he is out of touch with these things. Lass helped me to understand that often in our darkest hour, during pressing danger, that the Master's closest to us. He cares, and he cares profoundly. It is his presence which gives us shalom. It is his nearness which gives us hope. It is the protection from which he gives us life. Amid this, he enjoys our company. He loves to have us alongside. He, too, finds consolidation and eager, alert watchfulness of his friends in the midst of our danger. There is delight. We need not be alarmed or anxious. He is there. All is well between us. Baruch haba b'shem Yahuwah. Baruch be the one who comes in the name of Yahuwah. Hallelujah. That ends this book today. Brethren, I hope you enjoyed it. I will probably at some time clip all of it together as one long book. It's a wonderful book. It gives us a great insight into not only the author and what he went through as a sheepman, but also into our own lives and our relationship with the Mashiach and our relationship with his Father through him. It's a beautiful story about how we should be with him, how we could learn from the smallest and simplest lessons. It doesn't always take the largest lessons for us to learn. We don't have to lose something profound to understand the profundity of his love. Well, we love you. We hope that you enjoyed this, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you, guys. Shalom.